It is a Thursday morning in late October, and a King Air has just been cleared for takeoff in Wichita Mid-Continent Airport. One pilot on board and a simple job ahead of him: fly the aircraft to Arkansas and hand it over. Seconds later, he radios the tower. "Tower, just declaring an emergency, we just lost the left engine." The aircraft climbs to about 120 feet above the ground, rolls into a left bank, and never comes back out of it. It strikes a building on the airport infield and erupts into flames, killing the pilot and 3 people who had been inside and injuring 6 more. What makes this accident sit differently from others, like it is a single fact buried in the investigation files? The building the aircraft hits is a Flight Safety International Training Facility, one of the most recognized aviation training centers in the world. A place where airline and corporate pilots from across the country come specifically to learn how to handle emergencies in aircraft exactly like this one. It is the same facility where the same pilot completed his King Air training just 6 weeks earlier. Welcome to TragicFlights. Every tragedy has a story, every disaster has a cause, and every flight leaves lessons behind. If you never want to miss the stories behind these events, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes of TragicFlights. Let's begin. To understand this flight, you have to understand the man sitting in the left seat, because Mark Goldstein is not a stranger to this airport, and he is not a stranger to aviation. He is 53 years old, a retired air traffic controller who spent years working the towers and radar screens at Wichita Mid-Continent, and he knows this airport the way most people know the street they grew up on. He knows how the runways are oriented, which buildings sit where on the infield, how the approach paths line up against the city around it, and which taxiways connect to which ramps, because he spent his entire professional career watching aircraft move through this space from the other side of the glass. Goldstein holds 3,139 total flight hours, with 2,843 of them in multi-engine aircraft, and he holds an airline transport pilot certificate, the highest rating a civilian pilot can earn. So Goldstein is not a weekend hobbyist. He is an experienced, credentialed aviator who has been around aviation long enough to understand the difference between a manageable emergency and one that is not. And he also recently passed a formal examination on exactly that subject. That examination happened in Wichita, at the Flight Safety International Training Center on the airport infield, where Goldstein completed a full King Air 300 series initial training course from September 4th through September 19th, 2014, just 6 weeks before the crash. The course ran 58.5 hours of ground training, 12 hours of briefings, 14 hours as the pilot flying in the simulator, and 12 more hours as the pilot not flying, and it covered emergency procedures in detail, including exactly what to do if an engine fails during takeoff. He passed the written and oral examination. He passed the simulator check. He walked out of that building on September 19th, a certified King Air pilot, and he walked back past it every time he came through this airport in the weeks that followed. The aircraft he flew on October 30th, 2014 is a Beechcraft King Air B200, registered N52SZ, and it had been purchased by Gilliland Aviation of Georgetown, Texas, just 2 days earlier on October 28th. This flight is not carrying passengers, it is just a ferry flight to take the newly acquired aircraft from Wichita to Mena Intermountain Municipal Airport in Arkansas, where it will be based going forward. Goldstein is the sole occupant, and there is nobody behind him, nobody to look after, just him and the aircraft and a straightforward flight to hand the plane over. But the aircraft itself is 14 years old at the time of the accident, powered by 2 Pratt & Whitney PT6A42 turboprop engines, each turning a Hartzell 4-bladed constant-speed propeller with full feathering capability. It has accumulated 6,314 total airframe hours and 7,257 cycles, and major scheduled maintenance, including hot section inspections on both engines, which was completed just 8 days earlier at Hawker Beechcraft Services in Wichita. Since that maintenance, the aircraft has logged exactly 1.4 hours of flight time and 2 takeoff and landing cycles, which is why what happens next initially points so many people toward a maintenance-related explanation. At 7:40 in the morning, Goldstein has the aircraft refueled at signature flight support on the field. The two outboard tanks are filled to capacity, and the fueling receipt later shows 57 gallons added to the left main tank and 53 to the right. The auxiliary tanks are left empty, which is standard for a ferry flight of this distance, and by every number on the paperwork, the aircraft is properly fueled and within its weight limits for the trip. And at 9:47 in the morning, the tower clears the King Air for takeoff from runway 1R, with a runway heading departure and a climb to 5,000 feet. Goldstein acknowledges the clearance, and the aircraft begins its takeoff roll. Within seconds of leaving the ground, the left engine experiences a reduction in power. At 9:47 and 52 seconds, just before the power loss, Goldstein is heard on the cockpit voice recorder confirming that the autofeather system is armed. "We have 80 knots, feathers armed." He is running through his checks exactly as trained. But seconds later, the left engine's thrust drops sharply, and the aircraft begins to yaw and roll toward the affected side. Goldstein immediately calls the tower. "Tower, just declaring an emergency, we just lost the left engine." His voice is composed and direct, the voice of a man who spent years in aviation talking to pilots on the other side of this exact call. And now he is the one making it, alone in the aircraft, 100 feet off the ground, with an engine that has just quit. The plane, the KingAir B200, is equipped with two systems specifically designed to help a pilot survive this moment. The first is the autofeather system, which, if properly armed and functioning, automatically feathers the propeller on the failed engine the moment it detects a power loss, removing the asymmetric drag without requiring the pilot to identify the failed engine and manually complete the procedure while also trying to fly the aircraft. The second is a rudder boost system, which provides mechanical assistance to the pilot's rudder inputs, so that holding directional control against an asymmetric thrust condition requires less physical force and less time to execute correctly. Both systems are documented as installed on N52SZ, and neither can be confirmed as functioning at the time of the accident, because the post-crash fire destroys the components investigators would need to test them. So beyond whatever the automated systems may or may not have done, the emergency procedure for a KingAir B200 at this moment is specific and well documented in the aircraft's own manual. And it is the same procedure Goldstein reviewed and completed in the simulator at Flight Safety 6 weeks earlier. Maintain directional control using rudder on the side of the functioning engine. Retract the landing gear to eliminate drag and allow the aircraft to climb. Then feather the propeller on the dead engine to stop it from windmilling and pulling the aircraft further sideways. When investigators finally examined the wreckage after the crash, they find that neither propeller has been feathered and the landing gear is still extended. The aircraft never climbed above approximately 120 feet above the ground, which means those gear doors and dangling wheels were creating drag the entire time the pilot was trying to keep the aircraft flying, and the unfeathered propeller on the failed engine was pulling the aircraft further into its left roll with every second that passed. Tower controllers, who witnessed the crash from the cab, later tell investigators they saw the aircraft enter a shallow left bank shortly after Goldstein's radio call, and that the bank angle continued to increase rather than recover. One analysis of the accident, published in Plane and Pilot magazine after the NTSB's final report, notes that the track the aircraft was following when it struck the building would likely have put it about 1/4 of the way along runway 19R, which runs 10,301 feet and sits directly within that track's path, and raises the question of whether Goldstein may have been attempting to maneuver toward that runway for an emergency landing rather than executing a straight-ahead climb, a decision that, given the altitude and configuration, left no margin for the approach to succeed. What is known is that the aircraft strikes the Flight Safety International building, the same building where Goldstein completed his KingAir training 6 weeks earlier, and the post-crash fire destroys most of the airframe before investigators can examine the critical components they need most. Mark Goldstein, the sole occupant, is killed in the impact. 3 people inside the flight safety building are also killed, and 2 more sustain serious injuries, while 4 others are treated for minor injuries. 6 people inside a training facility on a routine Thursday morning, none of whom had any connection to the flight, became part of the casualty count because a repositioning leg nobody was watching closely went wrong in the first few seconds after liftoff. In the hours after the crash, the question everybody asks is the same one investigators ask first. What went wrong with the left engine? The aircraft had been recently inspected 8 days earlier. Both engines had been inspected at the hot section level, and the logbooks showed nothing that should have created a problem this early in the flight. Early speculation from the press and aviation community leans toward mechanical failure, since an engine failing seconds after a recent hot section inspection seems like exactly the kind of malfunction that must have had a cause hiding in the maintenance work. But when the NTSB completes its examination of the left engine and its control systems, that theory runs into a wall. The post-crash fire has destroyed enough of the airframe that investigators cannot reconstruct every component they would need for a definitive answer. But what they can examine reveals no anomaly that would have prevented normal operation. There is no broken part, no failed seal, no identifiable mechanical defect that explains why this engine lost power. The cause of the power reduction is never determined, and the NTSB's final report, released on March 1, 2016, acknowledges that directly, listing the left engine power reduction for reasons that could not be determined as a contributing factor rather than a root cause. What investigators do find in the broader record, though, is that the friction lock on a KingAir power lever has a documented history of causing exactly this kind of problem. A search of the Aviation Safety Reporting System, the database where pilots voluntarily report safety concerns, turns up 3 separate reports of insufficient friction lock settings, leading to uncommanded power lever movement in various KingAir models during takeoff, which means this kind of power loss, a lever slowly creeping backward on its own because the friction setting was not checked properly before flight. It had happened to other pilots before this flight and had been reported. Whether this is what happened to N52SZ on October 30th is something the fire makes impossible to confirm, but the friction lock check appears on the KingAir B200 pre-takeoff checklist for exactly this reason, and the NTSB notes it as one of the items Goldstein did not verbally complete before advancing the throttles. The investigation also surfaces details about Goldstein's health that sit outside the mechanical and procedural findings, documented in the medical factual report included in the full accident docket. Goldstein had been living with anxiety and depression since 1997, with an episode beginning in October 2013 that was still ongoing at the time of the accident, which he did not disclose to the FAA on his medical certification. There were other disclosed health conditions which his primary care physician saw him about a month before the crash and noted he was stable on his medication, and the investigation does not suggest impairment played a role in what happened on the runway. However, the FAA's certification system never knew about the depression or the medications, and that gap is part of the record as a reminder of how much the system relies on pilots to self-report conditions that are specifically required to be disclosed. In the years that followed, families of those killed filed a wrongful death lawsuit naming several defendants, including Textron Aviation, Hartzell Propeller, Pratt and Whitney Engine Services, Yingling Aircraft, and the aircraft's previous owner, with claims centered on questions about the aircraft's systems and whether everything that should have been working was working. As always, there is a version of this Thursday morning where the gear comes up and both propellers feather in the first seconds after the left engine loses power, and where a lightly loaded KingAir B200, with one engine still producing thrust climbs away from the runway, and where Mark Goldstein lands safely somewhere on the airport and nobody inside the flight safety building ever knows anything happened at all. The NTSB's own performance calculations confirm it, because the left engine was still producing low to moderate thrust even after the power reduction, and the right engine was producing full takeoff power, and a lightly loaded aircraft in that configuration, with gear up and propellers feathered, is capable of climbing away. The window was narrow, measured in seconds and altitude, but it was real. What the record shows is that the steps needed to use that window were not completed, and that in the seconds between the engine losing power and the aircraft striking the building, the gap between what the aircraft needed and what it received was never closed. This accident is now a named reference point in turboprop engine-out training discussions across the industry, and specifically in conversations about the gap between passing a simulator check and executing the same procedure correctly in the first seconds of a real emergency at low altitude. The irony that the building the aircraft struck was the very building where Goldstein had trained 6 weeks earlier, where instructors had walked him through this exact scenario in a simulator, is not lost on the training community that has studied this case since the final report was released. The KingAir B200 carries no inherent fault out of this accident, and neither do the maintenance records from Hawker Beechcraft Services 8 days before. Rest in peace to Mark Goldstein and to the 3 people inside the flight safety building on October 30th, 2014, who had no way of knowing that the morning they walked into work would be the last. If this story moved you, make sure to share it, leave a like, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode of Tragic Flights.